Hey everyone, I'm Dave Asprey from Bulletproof, and it's a great honor to introduce Deepak Chopra. And I would like to ask you before we get going that if you're sitting behind us, given that we have seating, you might want to look at us while we talk. So if you can migrate to this side of the room, you'll be much happier with your ability to see what's going on. And if you'd like to take a seat at the table, please do. One of the interesting things you may not know about Deepak is that he taught leadership at Kellogg and Columbia for many years, in addition to his other accomplishments. And the topic for today is the future of education and leadership. And that's why I'm asking you to sit over there, because I know he's run classrooms many, many times. And this is a very nice sized group to be able to have an intimate connection. He's going to share some thoughts with you for the first half, perhaps, of our time. And after that, we'll take some questions for you. And so without further introduction, Dr. Deepak Chopra, welcome.
So let me just share with you some ideas in the first 15 minutes or so, and then we can have a conversation. Close the door. I am now 73 years old. My first exposure to leadership was when I was 6 or 7. Living in India, my father was an army doctor in the British Army first, and then in the Indian Army. And we were living in a small town called Jabalpur in India. And one day we read in the newspaper that Mr. Nehru, the first Prime Minister of India, heir to Mahatma Gandhi, was coming to our little town. So for 3 weeks, there was only one conversation in our house, always initiated by my mother. And that was what sari she should wear when Mr. Nehru arrived in our little town. And my father would tease her, and he would say, you know, there's going to be millions of people there. He's not going to notice your sari. In any case, on the day that he arrived, his motorcade was passing by our house. We were there on the streets at 4 o'clock in the morning. The motorcade was coming at 9 a.m. It's 5 hours before. My mother in a beautiful pink sari, my father in his army uniform with World War II medals, etc., and me and my little brother on the street. And about 9 o'clock, the motorcade came by our street, turned the corner. Mr. Nehru was sitting in a jeep, standing actually. He had a red rose in his lapel. He used to wear what is now called a Nehru jacket. And the crowd went crazy. Long live India, long live Mr. Nehru, etc., etc. And then as he passed by us, I swear to God, this is true, he turned and he looked at my mother. And he took his rose and he threw it at her. And everybody gasped. The crowd went crazy, except for her. She stepped forward like a queen, picked up the rose, looked at my father and said, "Daddy, what did I tell you?" Okay? So then we went home, and she put the rose in a little vase like this. And for 3 weeks, people came to our house to look at the rose. And it was amazing that they would come. In India, you know, when you go to a place which is revered, you take off your shoes, you step reverentially into the room, and that's what they did. And they just stared at the rose. After 3 weeks, the rose faded, and my mother had a big party, and everyone that was invited got a rose petal, one petal, faded rose petal, and you should have seen the attitude of these people when they looked at the rose. So yeah, I was 6 years. I asked my mother, what's so special about the rose? And so she said that rose was the symbol of freedom for India, that for 200 years we were captives of British colonialism, almost slaves. And Nehru, who was the heir to Mahatma Gandhi, always wore that to remember our history. And so that got me thinking about symbols and how actually heroes and icons are always encapsulated stories. And a great leader is the symbolic soul of a group. That can be a family, it can be a political organization, it can be a community, and for some people it can be the world. And so, I've been thinking about this all my life, and especially in these days when I think we have a crisis of leadership globally. Because leadership has become synonymous with power-mongering, influence peddling, cronyism, corruption, and bureaucracy. And so how do we create a new generation of leaders that actually has the skills to make a difference? In my opinion, leadership is, the leader is a symbolic expression of a collective dream. As when Martin Luther King said, I have a dream. He wasn't speaking about himself. He was speaking about a whole cultural shift in identity. So I'm going to show you just a very few slides to get the conversation going. Okay, so to make it easy, I've written the 7 principles of leadership in one acronym. And it's easy to remember. It's called LEADERS. So these are the skills we teach young people who want to be leaders and want to educate themselves about leadership. The first is really deep listening. Listening not just with your mind and looking for facts, but with your heart, with your gut, with your body, and ultimately listening in deep stillness. That automatically creates a vision for change. And what has emerged in the last few years is the whole concept of emergence. That when you have a group of people listening to each other, identifying each other's strengths, they have shared vision, they're emotionally and spiritually connected, then emergence happens. It just happens. It unfolds just by having an open, transparent system which is responsive to feedback, where people complement each other's strengths. And today we have lots of ways to measure strengths. You might be familiar with Gallup Strength Finder. We have our own strength finders that we have developed. So my strengths, for example, are I'm futuristic, I'm adaptable, I'm maximized by energy, I'm strategic, and I like to make connections. That's it. And then I look for people who actually complement my strengths. And ideally, a good team is between 5 and 12 people max, where people complement strengths, have shared vision, and learn to emotionally bond with each other. So emotional bonding includes things like emotion and social intelligence, how to remain emotionally free, and how to connect non-violently with your adversaries. And we teach people how to resolve conflicts as well, no matter who they are, by reframing the enemies as adversaries, and then adversaries as competitors, and then competitors as partners for shift. And the best incentive is always economic. So you bring out adversaries or enemies and give them an economic incentive, and open the whole thing to nonviolent communication, where you treat people with respect, where you recognize any conflict, there is injustice, there's the perception of something wrong on the other side, and where you don't understand the values of the other person, where you teach people to refrain from belligerence, understand what their values are, personal and professional, and don't bring up ideological or religious arguments into the whole exchange. Awareness is expanding your awareness from just the fight-flight response to how to be restfully alert and cultivate skills like intuition. Intuition is a form of intelligence that is contextual, relational, holistic, doesn't have a win-lose orientation, that in a way eavesdrops on the context, the meaning, the relationships, and the story that is unfolding for leadership and for being a catalyst for change. So awareness, if you are even slightly familiar with the Eastern concept of chakras. The chakras are junction points between consciousness and biology. So the first chakra represents survival and safety, the second, ambition, the third, love and belongingness, the fourth, creative expression, the fifth, self-esteem, the sixth, higher calling, and the seventh, transcendence. So we teach these skills. You can learn creativity, you can learn intuition, you can learn going beyond personal motivation into higher consciousness. Dare to dream a new reality, but more important, do it. So we believe in SMART goals. That's another acronym, SMART, stretch more than you can reach. Make everything measurable. Make sure that your team agrees with you on all these points. Record your progress and set time limits. When you have SMART goals, you find that you achieve the goals way before the time limit. It's just the way it happens. Empowerment is giving people self-esteem and making sure that their strengths are acknowledged, that they can be complimented, but also making sure that no one in a team feels beneath or superior to anyone else. So people talk about charisma all the time, and there's lots of studies about charismatic leaders. They are present, they are friendly, and they feel beneath no one. That's charisma. All charisma is just that. You're present, not distracted, you're friendly, and you feel beneath no one. That's true self-esteem, and you teach empowerment to everyone in the team. Responsibility, everything that goes wrong, you take the responsibility. Everything that goes right, you give your team the credit. And finally, synchronicity, which is, I've written a few books on that, meaningful coincidences. If you ask people who are amazingly successful, they'll always say one of the following: I was lucky, or I happened to be in the right place at the right time, or there were many opportunities, there were many coincidences. So in a way, good luck is nothing other than opportunity meeting preparedness. And every coincidence is something that I pay attention to. Because I ask myself, if something is happening frequently, what's the message I'm getting? So basically, these are the skills we teach. I've been teaching these until recently at Kellogg, I've taught at Harvard, Columbia Business School, Wharton, etc. And these skills are very important in young people who want to be leaders in the future. As I said, we have a crisis because leadership today is all about influence peddling, cronyism, corruption, and power mongering. It's not about creating a vision and executing a collective dream. But when you do that, you can make difference. I've mentioned Mr. Nehru because I'm a product of his vision. When India gained independence, he gave a speech at midnight where he encapsulated the last 1,000 years of Indian history and then created a vision for the next 100 years, not for a political cycle, which is what we have in the United States. Every leader is there to get re-elected, so the vision is only 4 years. But when you have a 100-year vision, which happened to be, I'm the product of that. Silicon Valley and Indians in Silicon Valley are the product of that. The institutes of technology, the institutes of medicine, science, and humanitarianism, all combined together. When you have people from diverse backgrounds, culturally, but also professionally, transparent, open system, emergence, shared responsibility, anything can happen. So can you just show me the next slide, please? This is something that we teach everyone after they find their strengths. What is it that you would do if you had all the money in the world and all the time in the world? And who would benefit from it? And then, of course, everything becomes play. Let me see the last slide, and I'll stop there. We've been doing a lot of studies now on how people blossom into effective leaders, and this is some of the things that we have been able to measure. A sense and shift in sense of self from the body, mind, and the world into that in which the experience is happening. So a lot of attention is given to expanding awareness from the experience to that in which the experience is happening. A shift in emotions in the direction of love, compassion, joy, equanimity. A shift in thinking where your internal dialogue is very quiet but also reflective. Reflective self-inquiry is part of the things we teach. Not being victimized by memory, but using memory. Insight, which is inner vision. All experience, by the way, comes in only 4 modes: sensations and perceptions, images, feelings, and thoughts. If you can just focus on witnessing sensations, perceptions, images, feelings, and thoughts, and be aware of them, then just in the mere awareness of them, there is insight. Insight leads to intuition. Intuition leads to creativity and vision, which ultimately leads to these flow states that I've been talking about. And one of the great things I found about great leaders is they have no sense of personal agency. And because they identify with awareness rather than experience, they also have lost the fear of death. So this is my summary. In the first 10-15 minutes, I'm happy to answer any questions. All these skills can be learned.
I'd like to open with a couple of questions and hand it over to the audience. How do we take young leaders, and is there technology, are there abilities to make young leaders go through that stack? The list you just provided, it usually takes about 15, 20 years for someone to evolve these skills. How do we take someone in their 20s who's going to become a leader and help them do it faster?
So every child that's growing up has a dream. Every child says, I asked my grandson when he was 5 years old, what's your dream? He said, I want to be a paleolinguistic anthropologist. And then at 7 years, he said, I want to be an astrobiologist. And today he's saying he wants to study natural history. So these kids have skills, and I teach parents, notice the strengths of your kids, not the weaknesses. So if you have a child who loves to play tennis, is poor at math, don't get him a math tutor, get him a tennis coach. Okay, always focus on the strength, the passion, the dream that a kid has, and every kid has dreams. And what we do is we take them away from their dreams and we focus on their weaknesses.
So, video games. Good for leadership, bad for leadership?
It depends on the video game. But now we know that technology, I mean, we are seeing kids born in they're called digital natives. I have seen 3-year-old kids hack into my Netflix account. They still can't speak properly, but they can hack into my Netflix account. So these kids have different brains. And every experience you have, by the way, through technology changes your brain. Every experience you have. There's a place in the brain called the default mode network, which actually interferes with our leadership skills, because it's all default mode network is all about me and mine. So when you can create video games that actually facilitate neural networks in the direction of creativity through problem solving, that's huge. And video games with deep learning, neural feedback, cardiac feedback, even feedback from the body, listening to sensations and actually looking at sensations in your body. That's part of the deep listening process. Your body has an inner intelligence that your brain doesn't have. And it's the ultimate and supreme genius, because everything is happening in your body with every experience that is recorded. So, you know, when we talk about consciousness, and I know we are interested in consciousness, I don't look at consciousness as a local phenomenon. Consciousness is non-local, but it localizes in our body, and it localizes in every cell of our body. And through intelligent, innovative video games, deep learning, machine learning, neural feedback, cardiac feedback, body feedback. You can actually train people to enhance their creativity and intuitive skills. I think we don't give enough attention to this intelligence, which is actually much more accurate than anything that the rational mind can achieve. The rational mind based on empirical facts. We pride ourselves with this, but what are empirical facts? They are a species-specific mode of knowing in response to questions we ask. So the more questions we ask, and I ask kids to ask themselves this question: who am I? Who wants to know who am I? What do I want in my life? What am I grateful for? What is my purpose? And who benefits from this? Kids respond to these very fast. And then you create systems through video games as well. So big fan of technology.
If that sounds a little bit crazy, I spent 4 months of my life with the electrodes glued to my head doing exactly the work you talk about. And there's no way I could have had the business success that I've had without the awareness that was driven by technology, because it would have taken me too long otherwise. So this is stuff that actually people really do. It's had a profound effect on me, including some of your books. So thank you for pointing out that it's possible to do that. Let's open this up for anyone who has questions. If you're here, you just have to press and let go of the speak button, and then you can ask a question.
I think it's interesting to point out that 2 organizations call their clients or customers users, which is big pharma and tech companies. I also want to point out you were an adult by the time you were using technology. I think when we're talking about children, their brains are a little different. I come from a community in Boston right outside of MIT. And I have a doctorate in technology and education. I've spoken at MIT, I code, I've brought into technology to this region with coding for girls and so forth. And I'm published in this peer-reviewed. So I love technology like you. Simultaneously though, I think right now the data is still not 100% when the child is quite young. And of course it can be used in a way like virtual reality and so forth and so on. But we've gotten so far away from nature and what is really with the intelligence of the heart that Dr. Chopra is referring to, because the research is showing that this brain is different from the brain here. There is a brain that lives in our heart, and that's well defined by yourself and other cardiologists, correct?
Yeah. The brain is distributed in every cell through the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. And one can learn, actually, through technology as well, how to activate these different parts of our nervous system. So I totally agree with what you're saying, but technology is here to stay. It's part of our evolution. And one of the principles in evolution is that if you don't adapt, you become irrelevant. So if we are going to move into the future, we have to accept technology as part of our existence, and we have to learn how to use it. Technology is neutral by itself. You can interfere with an election, you can cyber hack your way to anything, or you can create a more peaceful, just, sustainable, healthier world. I look at the internet as our evolving global brain. And right now, you can even, you send somebody an emoticon, you can give them a dopamine hit. You send somebody an abusive troll, and their blood pressure goes up. So, we know that we are now connected in a way that we never were. So how are we going to use technology intelligently? We can use it for diabolical purposes, but we can also use it for improving well-being.
I'm not sure when I lost living in the now, but it was some time ago, and listening to both of you this morning and then today, it's something that obviously I want to take away and work on in my own life. I've got a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old boy, 2 boys, and listening to you about awareness and living in the now, maybe 2 questions. One is, do you think that children do that better than we collectively do as adults? Question 1. And question 2, what tools can I help them with, provide them in the environment to provide it so that they don't become me?
So every child has curiosity, wonder, and also joy. and every child loves to play. Those are characteristics of only mammals. Reptilian brain doesn't play. It just is in the fight-flight response all the time. But our emotional brain, we are called mammals because of the word mama, mother, which is also the origin of the word mother, matrix, matter, music, time, measurement, myth, and story. So children respond best to play, stories, and emotions. The first 3 years of life, all you have to remember is 4 things. Attention, which means deep listening. Affection, deep caring. Appreciation, noticing their strengths. And acceptance, not trying to change them. And encouraging play and storytelling. So, I'm a product of that. I have to say my mother used to tell me stories every night. And she would always stop. There were amazing stories about people who made a difference in the world, and mythical stories. And stories change the brain. And so my mother would stop at a cliffhanger every night and say, now I want you to dream the ending of this story and make sure it's a love story. So a good story has all these elements. It has love, it has trials and tribulations, it has a good ending, but it also has good characters and bad characters. Watch any soap opera and you'll see what a good story is. Doesn't matter if it's a Bollywood or a Hollywood or a Spanish soap opera. So recently, actually, one of my COOs was a young woman from Saudi. Her name is Lina Nasser. She's the daughter of the current CEO of Aramco. And so she has everything the world can offer her in terms of, abundance and affluence. But when she was little, she was, when people asked her, what do you want to do when you grow up? She would say, I want to be a babysitter. That's all she could think of. Coming from a very affluent family, one of the most affluent in Saudi. Then, at the age of 18, she read a book in her library. And the book was How to Teach Math to Black Children. It was written by an African-American mathematician who would tell his kids, the classroom, stories about brilliant African-American scientists, and their scores went up. So Lina went to her library and did a search and found a woman from the time of Muhammad, a woman who was married to Harun al-Rashid, the author of the Arabian Nights. And her name was Zubaydah. And she was the first person to create wells for the pilgrims that came from Baghdad to Mecca in those days. And thousands of them would die en route, except for when she created the wells and even a hydro plant, and saved millions of lives, according to legend. So she started telling little girls in Saudi, in kindergarten, stories about Zubaydah, and suddenly they all wanted to be scientists. She then went to Harvard and did her degree on how stories change the brain. And she found that actually the more inspiring the story, the more intrigue it had, and the more elements of love, compassion, joy it had, their brains shifted, prefrontal cortex. So she got her degree in how stories change the brain. For children, that's what you do. Encourage play, tell them stories, tell them to bake up their stories also, give them a little bit of story and tell them to finish it. And play with them. Because play is the key to creativity. Not hard work, driving ambition, exacting plans. They are the last refuge of the failure, in my opinion.
There's one thing to tie in with that. You talked about cardiac training and breathing earlier. And even at 4 to 6, my kids were doing the Magic Fairy breathing game. It's the only game that they ever got to play, which taught them to take a very deep breath and control their stress response. Because when kids are young, you can do that. It's a $99 game that goes on your phone. So that's not what it's called. It's called heart math. You surely know about this stuff, but
Absolutely.
you can do that with kids for breathing.
You can change a person's emotional and physical state just in 1 minute through deep breathing. So if you take, first of all, one rule about breathing, by the way, always breathe through your nose. Never breathe through your mouth. Pay attention to that. You'll increase oxygenation to your body by 20%. You'll increase what is called nitrous oxide because the air goes through the sinuses, open up blood vessels, and stimulate the brain. So one thing every child should be taught is how to slow their breath through nasal breathing to about half. And they can learn to do it. In fact, children do it faster than anybody else. You can watch what happens to your heart rate as you slow your breathing and take a deep breath. But there are hundreds of breathing techniques that can modulate your biology in any way you want. So that's a very important point. You had a question?
I had two questions as well. One was if you could comment on biohacking and artificial intelligence, and particularly in artificial intelligence, do you think we're in a period of positive outlook in what's to come, or should there be a point that we draw a line and stop?
Well, it's both. You can't control. There's no technology that doesn't have a negative outcome, and you have to be aware of that. But we are in the midst of a major revolution where artificial intelligence, deep learning, VR, augmented reality, holography, are all coming together. So because I'm a physician, I focus on how these technologies can be used for improving well-being. I haven't gone into leadership skills with that. But you can actually now, in less than 5 years, I think, when you go to a physician, instead of getting a pharmaceutical, you might get a VR and augmented immersive experience, because once you change experience, you change biology. So if somebody has burns, for example, you create an environment that they think they're in snow, it's the most effective treatment for burns. The most effective treatment in the near future for eating disorders, anorexia, inflammation is going to be VR and immersive experiences. And that's true of phobias, of mental illness, but it's also true of chronic illness, because all chronic illness is accompanied by low-grade inflammation. And low-grade inflammation, anxiety, and depression are predictors of chronic illness. I think I mentioned this morning only 5% of disease-related gene mutations are fully penetrant. The rest are influenced by how we metabolize experience, which includes how we interpret experience. So you have two people going in Disney World on a joyride. One is petrified, making adrenaline and cortisol. The other is excited and happy, making oxytocin, dopamine, opiates, anandamide, and serotonin. All the same experience, but different interpretation. So there's a lot that technology can do to help us shift. And it's going to start with phobias and depression and anxiety, but it's going to move into the direction of inflammation. And then VR combined with all these other modalities. So I've created, as I mentioned this morning, I've created my own AI twin. He's read 90 of my books, every article, and has access to the best libraries. So it can now, my AI can speak, technically speaking, to 7 billion people simultaneously, one-to-one, answering questions personalized. So I see the future as personalized, predictable, participatory with your participation, but also as really not only preventing disease, but reversing disease through technology.
We have time for one more quick question.
Can I go for it? So first of all, I'd like to salute you. Like, I'm mesmerized by everything you said, and the fact that you've not just put all of these in theories, but you've applied it to yourself, similar to the example that you just gave. We work, so I've got a startup called Lemsa, and we work with children in the early childhood development stage. We work with about 17 million children at the moment. And I was just wondering, are you open, like, do you have a research institute that brings your philosophy into research and practice where we can collaborate on some of the things that you mentioned?
Yes, certainly. We have, and we collaborate with, our last published study was Harvard, UCSF, UCLA, Duke, etc. So the more collaborations these days, the faster you move. Very open to it. Well, we'll exchange.
On that note, please join me in saying thank you to Deepak Chopra.